Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is, 9 o'clock, 9:01, as a matter of fact, the way we start the show, on Monday, April 19th, 2021. Time for another show. I was alerted, luckily, just before the show by Justice that, Kagro in the Morning is live at 9 a.m., and that's almost now. I guess I better stop brushing my teeth and run downstairs. I mean, I knew the thing was going on, but, okay, it was cutting it close. And whatever. Okay. It's all right. Things are a little bit disrupted here, but I think everything is back in place now. So I guess we can tell you what Bill says with regard to the show being live. He says he concurs as well. So joining in Justice Putnam's majority opinion is Justice Harnsberger, who says the Kagro in the Morning radio show is live now. KagroX reports that the helicopter, the helicopter just successfully landed on Mars. This is true. I've been watching this thing happen, although I'm not exactly certain what they're doing with the damn thing. But of course, it also forgot the duck sauce for the egg rolls, so it's got to go back. I always wondered what would happen about that. If I was ever an astronaut, I would land on Mars or on the moon and say, I forgot my wallet. I'm turning around. I'm going back. And I don't know what kind of sense of humor they have for that sort of thing at NASA. I guess we'll never find out either, because I can't leave my house. So much less go to the moon or anywhere else for that matter. Coming up on full immunization from the vaccines, at which point I guess I can leave the house. And I leave the house. I do from time to time go and do these things. But big delivery, didn't have to leave the house for it this weekend, and couldn't leave the house because I spent all weekend rewiring everything. It's not as serious as it sounds. I wasn't actually doing like electronic, or electrician's work. I mean, I was just unplugging things and plugging them back in again. Not because they didn't work, but because I wanted them to continue to work. We finally have the, fingers crossed, the battery backups up and running here at Kagro in the Morning World Headquarters, which, as it turns out, means that in the event of a power outage, unless it happens like right now, and just so far, no. Okay, just waiting. Unless it happens right now or at the very, very beginning of the show, I think it means we'll be able to at least finish up a podcast, even if it happens at the beginning of the show and just never comes back on. We'll be able to declare at some point, okay, well, there's no power coming back here. And we'll wrap things up just so that we don't disappear from the air in the middle of things. But I got a major league battery backup for the computer that actually runs the show, and it even has a little monitor on it that tells me that I guess if we were to lose power now, we could continue going for 98 minutes. I imagine that somewhere around the 90-minute mark, it would, change its mind and say, 0. But you could get a major portion of the show done this way. And usually, of course, the electricity comes back on after 30 seconds or a minute or two, but the show is absolutely effed if, the electricity goes out and you kind of come back on. So we got that, and we got a battery backup downstairs with the incoming router or modem and router for the internet. So I don't know how long that one goes. I didn't buy the same super duper giant one because it's just got to run the modem and router. So I think that it will continue on for a certain amount of time, and I don't know. I'll work on figuring out exactly how long that thing will last too. But if you've ever unplugged your entertainment center or your computers or anything just to, paint the walls or anything, when you go to plug it back in, that's when you remember all the stupid reasons why this thing is positioned there and this one is plugged into that outlet because the cord doesn't actually reach. And, then trying to get things undone and redone, they're tangled around one another, and it was just a nightmare. I was sweating plugging things in and unplugging them and plugging them back in again. I don't know if everybody has the same experience, but just a mess of cables. But the good news is, I guess, if you, like with Greg, if the power goes out, his generator will run his refrigerator. I don't care about food. I care about the show because that's what you care about. And I guess that's good news. Don't try anything funny. I'm not saying that this is a great idea to run the show this way. It's just that it will happen. Good morning, Greg. How are you?
Good morning. So,
Okay.
How many of these things do you have?
There are two, but I realize now that I have them out in the open, my kids will want them for their computers, you know.
Well, it's not just that. I mean, I have several.
Yeah.
But one is for the computer that I talk to you with.
Yes.
And the other is for the modem.
Right. That's what I've got at the
so
moment.
that I don't go offline when this happens.
Right. I realized I could run the computer, but what good is it without the internets?
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm not sure how you record the show and whether you have to be online for that.
That's true. I guess I don't.
So if you're going to do a podcast later that you can edit, nobody knows.
That's
but
true.
But during the show itself, they would know.
Yeah, that's true. The backup should keep us on the air. I have to figure out some way of measuring how long it will go, because the super duper one has a nice panel on it that gives me digital readout of how many minutes
here's
are
the
left.
Load, and here's how long it'll last. And when it says an hour, they really mean about 45 minutes.
That's what I figure. But I would think it would get us through small outages, and then if it's not over, then I'll say, all right, goodbye, everybody.
Yeah, we're small outage experts here, so we know all about that stuff.
Okay.
So speaking of technology,
yes,
you were right. They had the Mars helicopter take off and land just as a proof of concept sort of thing.
Okay. Well,
and I tell you, as soon as I saw that, the first thing I thought of was the old Marx Brothers movie with the three great aviators. I think it was Coconuts, but don't quote me on that. Where they're describing how they came to America.
How they came.
Yeah, Chico's doing all the talking, and he says, basically, we tried to fly here, and we ran out of gas, so we had to go back. So then we put more gas in, and the next time we tried to fly here, we were within 10 feet of landing, and what happened? We ran out of gas, so we had to go back. And I'm thinking, okay, that's how the helicopter's going to work, right? You want your duck sauce? You want your, I forgot the photographs. Oh, I was supposed to beam this stuff back. I better go back and get all that equipment because I forgot something. Yeah. You always forget something important, even robots.
True. They forgot to do anything important so far. As they've been taking off, and I'm glad they can prove the concept. I guess it's a weird thing, you know. Will a helicopter work on Mars? Different. But the answer is yes. So now
they're going to fly 3 or 4 more times. And, of course, interestingly, this broke the same time that the MIT group put together their robot Cheetahs. I don't know if you saw that, but I sent you that link.
I did see that go by. Oh, okay, that was you sending me the link. I said, where did I see the robot Cheetahs?
Yeah, so there's about 10 or 11 of them playing soccer and doing backflips. And, of course, they're semi-indestructible. And I've been working on my garage door opener, hoping to modify them for an off switch for these things when they come for me. So I'm hoping that'll work, but you never know.
Yeah, I have no idea. They could just get jobs selling Cheetos instead.
Yeah, I suppose. So a lot happening today.
Robot
but
Cheetahs.
It's Groundhog Day. It's the same thing: politics and pandemic.
Yes.
Which one do you want to talk about first?
Pandemic. A lot of people are concerned about that. Well, why don't we try that first?
Okay, let's do that first.
All right.
So some big milestones today.
Yeah.
Half of eligible adults in America now have at least one shot. And as of today, everybody over 16 is supposed to be eligible to get their vaccines. And that's all good. And we're getting to the point, and Dr. Fauci thinks by end of May, where there'll be enough vaccine for everybody who wants one. That's just in another month. So even without J&J, the numbers look something like this. Pfizer has given out about 109 million vaccines into people's arms, and Moderna just under 100 million, I think, and J&J about 7 million. Just to put this in perspective, the J&J vaccines haven't been thrown out. They're still sitting in refrigerators somewhere, regular refrigerators, because they don't have to be, The Empire Strikes Back frozen. And Urbamite or whatever, So with all of that happening, the panel is taking this week to decide what to do about the dude who had a clot, and is that enough to say that we're going to bring it back, but with restrictions, and what will those restrictions be? And I was a big proponent of the pause. It made sense to me. If you're saying stuff you don't understand, wait a minute. Now, after they met, and then decided to wait another week. I wasn't so keen on that, but that's what they're doing. And in the end, I think it won't make that much difference. People are arguing about it. I had a piece today in the Johnson & Johnson pausing that argues it from a couple of different points of view. But one of the arguments is that the pause is just going to cause too many deaths. And the thing is, we don't know that. The thing about looking at what's going on with the vaccine is that there's, and of course with the pandemic in general, and with steps that you're supposed to take, and what do we do now that we're vaccinated? There's a lot of misinformation and disinformation out there. And it's especially true that nobody has a lane on this. Everybody's entitled to speak up about this and give it from their own perspective. You don't have to be an epidemiologist to note that the colleges are especially hurt because they wanted to vaccinate all their students before they scattered for the various spring breaks. And so Johnson & Johnson would have been perfect for that. Same thing with hospitalized patients where you only have them for that moment. Give it to them on the way out. J&J makes more sense, a one and done. So all the vaccines are not the same. They are different. But at the same time, putting the numbers in perspective is important. And I have a series of articles here that I thought was interesting in terms of trying to convey to the public risks and benefits. And that's important because it's not the epidemiologists who are doing this on a large scale, writ large. It's your general average everyday newspaper pundit or a reporter or a cable talking head. And so it's important for them to be all on the same page so that everybody, who's conveying this information is helping rather than hurting. So the first piece is from David Leonhardt, New York Times. Irrational COVID fears. Why do so many vaccinated people remain fearful? Listen to the professor's story. And the professor in question is a law professor at Yale named Guido Calabresi, federal judge, Yale law professor, you know?
Yeah. I mean, we don't hang out, but sure.
Good. So he invented a little fable that he's been telling law students for more than 3 decades. He says, imagine a god coming forth to offer society a wondrous invention, one of these trickster gods probably, that would improve everyday life in almost every way, allow people to spend more time with friends, see new places, do jobs they otherwise couldn't do, but with a cost.
Okay.
In exchange for bestowing this invention, the god would choose 1,000 young men and women and strike them dead.
Oh.
Would you take the deal?
How old am I? Right. Okay.
Are you invulnerable? You're young. Would you take the deal?
Am I supposed to answer?
Yeah.
Now, sure. I don't know.
Okay.
Probably
Most
not.
of the students say no.
Yeah.
And the professor then delivers the lesson. Well, what's the difference between this and the automobile?
Automobile?
Yeah, automobile.
Yes.
In truth, automobiles kill many more than 1,000 young Americans.
True.
And we can't fathom a world without them. We accept the risk. And the main point he's trying to make is the difference between something new and something we're accustomed to.
Yes.
We have built in and are accustomed to the cost of driving. We are built in and accustomed to the cost of flying. But when you come up with a risk that is somehow new and different, then all of a sudden a much, much smaller risk becomes unacceptable.
Yeah.
That's his point.
I gotcha.
So it's important to think about all of this stuff when you're talking, for example, about the J&J pause. Yes, the number of people who are affected is very, very small. No, the scientists who are trying to look at this and public health people didn't feel like they had a handle on exactly how small, and they felt responsible, like major manufacturers, for what happens. Yeah. So they took a moment to pull all the information they could and decide what's going on. But in the end, they may look at it and say, well, the risk is so small compared to everything else we do in life that it's just worth it. And so how we're going to deal with this is tell people about the risk and then put it in our literature so we're covered, for legal reasons.
Sure.
Everybody gets a piece of paper that they throw out, handed to them, telling them about the risks.
Right. Some commercials.
Yeah. So coming to grips with the comforting realities of post-vaccination life is going to take some time for most of us. It's only natural that so many vaccinated people continue to harbor irrational fears, but slowly recognizing irrationality will be a vital part of overcoming COVID. We're not going to get to a place of zero risk, Jennifer Nuzzo, a Johns Hopkins epidemiologist, told me. I don't think that's the right metric for feeling like things are normal. Dr. Ashish Jha of Brown University, Dean of Public Health, we quote him often, told us about his own struggle to return to normal. He's been fully vaccinated for almost 2 months, and then he had a drink with a vaccinated friend, unmasked, and it was hard psychologically for me, but it was awesome.
Okay. What'd you drink?
So, right. So that's where things need to go, at least in terms of your head. Derek Thompson has the second of the triad that we're doing here, the trilogy. This one is in the Atlantic. It's called Are Outdoor Mask Mandates Still Necessary?
Okay.
Governments need to give Americans an off-ramp to the post-pandemic world. Ending outdoor mask requirements would be a good place to start. We know that most of the issues are indoors, and that's because it's airborne. And the whole point about being airborne still to this day gets focused on. How do we know this? Because libraries are still cleaning books before they put them back on the shelves. Yes. That's not how it spread.
People got used to
all of this deep cleaning stuff is performative art. It's not public health. You don't need to do that. What you need to do is wear a mask if you're close and make sure ventilation inside is good. And those things would be way more important than whether or not you clean the book off before you pick it up. You don't have to wash your groceries, wash your cereal box before you have breakfast. I mean, that's just not needed. We did that in the beginning because we didn't know. And now people still do it because it's performative and you could see it. But wearing a mask outside is performative too. It doesn't really do anything except signal that you're taking this seriously. And that's fine if you're going to be in a crowd. But if you're just walking the dog, you don't have to wear a mask. And you know what? Here in Newtown, where it's kind of ruralish, I've never worn a mask when I go outside to walk the dog. You don't need to.
You're terrible.
There's nobody within shouting distance of you. And if you see somebody and they're on the other side of the street walking their dog, you don't need to put masks on as you go by. On the other hand, if you're standing at the front of your driveway and then the delivery truck comes up, like what happened yesterday, I had Abby, I was ready to walk her, and all of a sudden the delivery guy shows up. It's Amazon on a Sunday, dropping off the new router because the old router broke, and I was worried about not getting on the air this morning, but that's fixed. So I had my mask in my pocket, put it on. He was wearing his mask. No big deal. That's the end of it. I mean, that's the way people should be acting now. Not, oh, my goodness, you shouldn't be wearing a mask. And yet people are not saying that yet. And that's different than inside. And so Derek Thompson, writing about this in the Atlantic, said, at the restaurant, I saw an inversion of this rule. Person after person who dutifully wore a mask on the uncrowded street took it off to sit still in close proximity and inside. I felt like I was watching people put on their seatbelts in parked cars and unbuckle them as they put the vehicle in drive, talking about the car analogy.
Oh, they like the little bell.
Perhaps a bit of weirdness should be expected, he says. Rising vaccinations and burbling variants make for an awkward transition period in which it's legitimately confusing to know when masking is a necessary and considerate act and when it's no more epidemiologically protective than wearing a hat. And government rules aren't doing much to help clarify the situation. And that's part of the problem. The criticism from CDC is not that they paused the J&J. It's that they took too long to get to the point where they were saying, yes, this is airborne, and then giving us rules that make sense. Wash your hands, absolutely, but stop cleaning off your books with Clorox wipes and keep wearing masks inside, but don't wear them outside. They haven't gotten to that point, and they need to.
Okay. I'll talk to them.
Right? And so requiring that people always wear masks when they leave home, especially in places with low levels of viral transmission, is overkill. That's why a lot of rural areas aren't paying attention to this, among other things. As mentioned, the coronavirus disperses outside, posing little risk to people who are walking alone or even swiftly passing by strangers. So he's at the same place I was, except I was there a couple of months ago. In fact, almost all of the documented cases of outdoor transmission have involved long conversation or face-to-face yelling. The risk calculation changes if you're standing in a crowd Okay,
Right.
but that's an easy carve-out. States can end blanket mandates and still recommend outdoor masking by anybody experiencing symptoms or in a crowd. That's all.
Okay.
Right? And given the very low risk of
Problem.
transmission outdoors, I think outdoor mask use from a public health perspective seems arbitrary. Muj Sevic, an infectious disease and virology expert at the University of St. Andrews in Scotland, told the Washington Post, I think it affects the public's trust and willingness to engage in much higher yield interventions. We want people to be much more vigilant in indoor spaces. So pick those indoor spaces, say I, and get it right. And then finally in the trilogy is a really wonderful piece. This is by subscription, but you're allowed to sneak peek free pieces if you want to read them. Fine. By Zeynep Tufekci, who's doing a trifecta about misinformation. Well, and this one is Pandemic as Metaphor. And she particularly picks on that Florida lawyer who dressed up as the Grim Reaper.
Oh, yeah.
And was going around yelling at people on Florida beaches.
Oh. Yes.
Performative. The beaches aren't the problem. It's the restaurants inside. And you can contort yourself and say, well, we're getting upset because we know they're going inside afterwards. Then concentrate on the inside afterwards. Leave the people on the beaches alone.
Well, it is performative, and you'll get thrown out of the restaurant. So.
Yeah. And you got thrown off the beaches, too. But this guy was going around with dressed like the Grim Reaper, raising money, putting out billboards, having film crews follow people around, trying to shame them. And that just doesn't work.
I don't know. He got in the paper.
Yeah, he got in the paper. It worked for him, but it didn't work in terms of helping any.
Oh, well, yeah.
So Zeynep writes, I first wrote about the need to keep beaches and parks open as early as April of 2020. I'll put the details in the next post, but for the moment, let's just put it here as context. We've long known that outdoor transmission is relatively rare. Later in 2020, frustrated, I wrote another article pleading to stop scolding beachgoers in the summer. It was among the safest activities we could do while we face perhaps another full year of social distancing and increased isolation. Right? And sometimes people suggest it's okay to focus scolding on beaches because people who travel to beaches often do unsafe things as well, like indoor dining, but that seems particularly contortionist. If we're trying to tell people that indoor dining is unsafe, the most obvious way to do this seems to say indoor dining is unsafe.
Yes, on a banner flying over the beach.
Right, something like that, whether it's the beach or not. So anyway, the point being made that if you concentrate on the stuff that's important, you don't get distracted by this unimportant stuff. And then you don't have to walk back 9/10 of what you were trying to say 6 months ago.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know. I think the focus on the beach in terms of reaching people who are going to go to the restaurants. I mean, this is the crowd for whom the no shoes, no shirt, no service signs were made. And they're not always very careful people.
Right. One of the interesting things about this piece is that she starts it off by quoting Susan Sontag, the illness as metaphor, talking about tuberculosis. Oh. And part of the whole psychology here is trying to blame people who are sick for being sick.
I can do that.
Yeah, everybody does that.
All right.
It's wrong, it's bad, but everybody does it. Last week, Zeynep writes, in the article I wrote about the latest set of outbreaks in the U.S., including around Michigan, I suggested sending more vaccines to such areas. I did too. Before the J&J pause, I said, send the J&J stuff to Michigan. Get them vaccine. The governor's asking for it. Do what she says. I said.
Yeah.
So Zeynep says she got a lot of responses asking why we should send more vaccines to a place that's experiencing a surge, since it must be their fault.
Oh. Well, all right.
Well, it's not their fault, and you have to stop blaming people for getting sick. And people do that. I mean, it's sort of interesting to correlate the fact that Trump voters and vaccine spread and Sturgis and people who don't behave, or but it's good to point those out when there's something you could do about it. But just to do it in terms of, well, I want to blame these other people because I don't like them. You got to be really careful about that. That doesn't advance convincing people to get their vaccines. So even a cursory look at the statistics of this pandemic reveals that most of the victims are poor and people of color, especially Hispanic or Black. That's what we'd call frontline workers who cannot stay home in the crowded housing conditions. So don't yell at people for going to work when they have to go to work. We talked about this in an indirect way when we talked about the Latino, Latina, Latinx, Hispanic vote in Texas and why Texans would vote for the Republican who's promoting the pandemic. And the reason is they have to go to work, and that's what they see as important. Mm-hmm. And all the statistics about half of American adults getting at least one shot obscures the fact that if you look at poorer communities, California or otherwise, Hispanic communities, what are the numbers for them? We know that the biggest group of people who don't want it are white Republicans, and that's also rural areas, and that's also white evangelicals, and those three groups overlap, so it's sort of tough to tease that out. But it's not evenly distributed, the vaccine. And so we know that there are issues with the inner cities in the Northeast, for example. And so, it's a lot of the simplistic stuff turns out that when you look at the details, makes you walk back a lot of your assumptions. So again, the message there is don't blame the people who aren't getting vaccinated. It's not necessarily their fault, and it's not necessarily their fault if they're sick. And yes, there are some prominent people who, I refuse to do this, and then get sick and die. Well, that's not necessarily the group of people I'm talking about.
Right. Plus it takes care of itself.
Yeah. Well, in that case.
To a certain extent, yes.
So maybe, just maybe, Zainab says, remember she's a sociologist, maybe just maybe, I can't remember if she's a sociologist or an anthropologist. Maybe, just maybe, if we were less focused on viewing illness as the wages of sin, we could do a better job noticing the victims and searching vaccines to areas experiencing outbreaks. So if Michigan asks for a vaccine, send them vaccine. Does it also take shutting stuff down that they don't want to shut down for political reasons? Yes. But one thing shouldn't preclude the other thing. And just because they didn't shut down or do things that you think they should do is no reason to withhold vaccine if they ask for it.
Yes. What if you say, here comes the vaccine, and somebody there says, we're going to kidnap you for bringing vaccine here?
Then say that other guy asked for it.
All right. That guy's got to go. But yeah, well, Michigan experiencing some big problems. And Republicans in Michigan spent the weekend trying to blame it on the governor who was trying to do more to bring the virus under control, but they resist at every turn, but they still insist that it's her fault that there's a surge in the virus. So a lot of blame game going around in Michigan, but that's because there's a lot of virus going around. Well, we'll be right back. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We are back with Greg. We got more pandemic news to do.
Yeah, Atlantic is actually doing a great job with this. Let me just, I don't know if we're going to do all the articles, but let me just read you some of the headlines here. This one, the danger of a dudes-only vaccine. And that happens when you don't really know what the risks are. Wow. Remember, there was a dude that had a clot, so it's one of the things they're looking at.
So now they're going to give it to only dudes?
Right. This one is the rural pandemic isn't ending. Public health leaders in rural America are turning toward the next and more difficult stage of the nationwide vaccination campaign, persuasion. That's really, the thing here. By the end of May, we'll have enough vaccine for any adult who wants it. Okay. That's in less than a month. Well, it's more than a month, but just about a month. And the thing is getting people to take it. The ones who want to take it have already lined up. So now we're going to start to get to the point where the 3 to 4 million shots a day, that's going to start to drop because the ones who are left are the ones who don't want to get it, which is why they haven't gotten it yet. And they will need to be persuaded, and part of the issue is going to be trying to persuade people in rural areas. This article about the rural areas, Americans will soon begin to fall back into the rhythms of pre-pandemic life, summer weddings, squishing into booths at chain restaurants, laughing together at movies, and it will feel like a victory over the coronavirus, but the virus might actually be gone. In pockets of the country, vaccination rates could stay low, creating little islands where the coronavirus survives and thrives, sickening and killing people for months after the pandemic has ebbed elsewhere. In a worst-case scenario, the virus could mutate, becoming highly transmissible, and eventually the new variant could leak from those islands and spread into the broader population. And that's the future that keeps some public health experts awake at night. Right now, America's in the simplest stage, getting shots to people who want them. Many Americans are still reluctant to get it. Public health leaders will soon have to refocus their efforts toward the next and more difficult stage, persuasion.
Mm-hmm. All right, that sounds tough.
Right, and then gives examples and experts saying the same thing. Okay, and then the publication of vaccines will complicate the effort. Cautiously, it's a relatively recent phenomenon, and the politicization of it, anti-vaccine sentiment, going back to Wakefield, and that history helps explain conservatives' reluctance today to get the COVID-19 vaccine. Until vaccines are available to every person nationwide, it'll be hard to accurately gauge how widespread vaccine hesitancy is, and that's why the recent polling after the J&J pause showing that people are now more skeptical of J&J but not about the others is important. It probably, at this point, depending upon how it's handled from this point going forward, hasn't changed the hesitancy all that much. Those who are hesitant still are, but not any more so than they were. But availability matters. It's one thing if you can't get one, and it's another thing where it's ubiquitous and everywhere. It's at your barbershop, it's at your church, it's at your dollar store, it's at the KFC. You know, if it's everywhere, I saw over the weekend I had tweeted a great little single tweet story about a guy who was delivering hoagies to a vaccine center in Philadelphia, and as a tip, they gave him a shot.
All right.
And that was wonderful. And
yeah,
that was,
I like that
he wrote, nothing is more Philadelphia than this.
I guess
okay,
not.
Great. I mean, that's really how it should work.
Except throwing the needles at you in a football game or something.
But the point is, the expectation is that some rural areas and some pockets of the country, even a couple of months from now, are still going to be highly uncovered. And that's something we're going to have to deal with.
Yes.
Okay. Other articles in the Atlantic, COVID-19 vaccines entering uncharted immune territory. We're not sure how long they work, but also at the same time, things like the coronavirus vector, the adenovirus vector vaccines, which include J&J and the AstraZeneca, are eliciting immune responses we hadn't counted on, so that has to be looked at. And then finally, this excellent one, the mRNA vaccines are looking better and better, and so there's going to be plenty of those. And so, yeah, we do have alternatives, thank goodness, and it really is a medical science miracle, just as much as the helicopter on Mars that flies.
Yes.
Which, by the way, has a small piece of the original Wright brothers plane attached to it. I don't know if you knew that.
I don't know that they're going to understand that on Mars, but okay.
They went to the Wright Brothers Museum and they got this like quarter-inch by quarter-inch piece of cloth that they put on the bottom of the thing. So when it flies, it's carrying Wright Brothers original material with it, which I think is really cool.
Yeah.
You didn't have to do that, but it was just like wonderful.
Sounds fun.
Anyway, so that's the news from the pandemic front today.
Cool. There's more.
Will Americans accept vaccine passports in their eagerness to reopen? This is from Ipsos. Americans most likely to back vaccine passports if they are supported by local hospital and healthcare workers. So persuasion matters, and that persuasion has to come from local people.
Okay. Can I require them to vote in person? I would like to try that.
I suppose.
Yeah, that's my new plan. Once I saw the polling, it said 45% of Republicans were saying they would resist the vaccine, according to that one poll. So I thought that would be the way to go, since they're making it so difficult to vote by mail or with drop boxes. Maybe we could convince them to open those up if I said, you can't get into the polling place without a vaccine passport. Now, if you're not vaccinated, there's a table right over there. Go right ahead, roll up your sleeve, and we'll let you vote. But if you don't have your vaccine passport and your record, I'm sorry, you're going to have to go and register for an absentee ballot or vote provisional. See if that works.
Have to vote Wednesdays.
Yeah, right. So we'll see whether that changes their minds and ahead of time, and then they can say that would be okay so long as there are plenty of drop boxes and I can vote by mail. See, that's where you've shot yourself in the foot, sir. Sorry.
So, civics polling, percent of Americans saying they do not plan to take the vaccine. Democratic seniors, 1%.
Yep.
Republican seniors, 22%. So the senior Republicans are doing relatively well. 22% is like baseline. That's fine. All Democrats, 3%.
Mm-hmm.
Independents 25%, Republicans 39%.
Yeah.
Now here's the problem. Non-senior, that is to say under 65 Republicans, 50% plus.
Yeah.
That's the group. The group that isn't taking the steps to help anybody else are the ones most resistant to getting the vaccine. They're the ones that go to the Sturgis, rallies.
We'll go again.
And yell at people. And the ones who survive go on to say, see, nothing happened to me.
Right. So, science. All right. Well, right.
So
I'd like to.
science.
I just want
to very
for
interesting
them to
stuff.
vote. That's all.
So turning to politics, the big story over the weekend, I think, was as I have a couple of political playbooks here, fury over the Anglo-Saxon caucus.
Ah, yes. Right. I heard about this one.
A congressional white caucus reports that Representatives Marjorie Taylor Greene and Paul, or MT Greene as we like to call her, yes. Paul Gosar, are planning to launch a House caucus based on uniquely Anglo-Saxon, read that as white people, traditions.
Very white.
It says that right in the Politico playbook. Read white people.
White. Well,
traditions
no other
has GOP leaders. Yeah, no other way to read it. Traditions has GOP leaders and Democrats protesting the embrace of blatant racism by some in the chamber. All eyes are on House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy, who last night tweeted his disapproval. McCarthy, of course, is just as much a useless wuss as John Boehner was, who's now tweeting about how he would strongly stand up for gun control if he were in charge, except he was in charge at Newtown, and he didn't squat. So shut up, you liar.
Yeah.
But anyway, getting back to Politico, the next day, GOP struggles with how to handle Trumpism and Trump. On day 2 of a massive wave of backlash, the America First caucus appears to have blown up on the launch pad as Representative MT Greene released a statement Saturday distancing herself from documents revealing plans for a congressional group based around uniquely Anglo-Saxon traditions, which I guess means they all want to be buried in ships and then set on fire and thrown into the harbor. I don't know what they're saying here.
Themselves blue, perhaps.
A spokesperson told CNN she wasn't launching anything.
Oh.
Major relief for Kevin McCarthy, because everything about Politico is McCarthy-centric, who pounced Friday, I love pounced Friday to disavow that racist dog whistle turned blowhorn rhetoric. Politically, the caucus would have been catnip for Democrats in the midterms. Still is, dudes, especially as Republicans aim to compete in moderate swing seats. But just because this white people caucus may not happen doesn't mean its critics are going to move on. Of course they're not going to move on because, it's pretty clear why. Now, while that's happening, big story in New York Times, One American News Network stays true to Trump.
Oh, yes.
A recent OAN segment said there was serious doubts about who's actually president, and another blamed anti-Trump extremists for the Capitol attack.
Yes.
But the thing that really...
Anti-Trump extremists.
Yeah. The thing that really caught my eye is when Rachel Abrams saw the story, and this quote isn't in the piece that I'm reading, but she tweeted it, that she spoke to one of the producers and said, look, it's not like we're Nazis, but we have to make a living.
So do Nazis.
Well, yeah. I mean, all the I did not see that coming jokes. I mean, what do you call people who tolerate Nazis? Nazis.
Pretty much.
That's what they're known as.
Other people. Yeah. The OAN
the good Germans, right? I mean, they were Nazis. And one of the producers, during the Trump presidency, Marty Gollingen, a producer, saw it as a scrappy upstart. During the Trump presidency, it moved right. And when he was watching coverage of the pro-Trump mob breaking the Capitol, he said he worried his work might have inspired the attack. It did. He added he and others at OAN disagreed with much of the channel's coverage. The majority of people did not believe the voter fraud claims being run on the air. I was like, okay, that's not good. That's what happens when people listen to us.
Yeah. Well, you're right about that. And liable in court. So
right.
We'll see.
Exactly. So then they talk about there's a fellow named Charles Herring who's in charge, and they call what he wants to put on H stories. These are things that you have to concentrate on, like Antifa and that sort of thing, or Antifa as they like to call it.
What's
whatever.
H for?
I'm not even sure what it is and what it's supposed to be, but somehow or other that's responsible for the riot.
Holy crap, this is irresponsible.
something like that. And then Dominion has sued Fox News, and two of Mr. Trump's lawyers, Mr. Galligan, the producer, said some OAN employees had hoped Dominion would sue them. A lot of people said this is insane. Maybe if they sue us, we'll stop putting stories out like this.
Maybe. I guess they just didn't have enough
that's
money
their own people.
to sue them. Well, yeah, that was what was so remarkable about this story. Is one of the journalists who read it, commenting, "This is really unusual to get somebody to go on the record while they work there to say something like this." That's true.
Right. And I found the tweet. Staffers at One American News said they felt responsible for spreading misinformation that led to the riot.
They were.
But they had bills to pay. They said no other job options. We're not Nazis, one producer told me, just like everyday people. And I said, yeah, everyday people who, tolerate Nazis.
Yeah. Well, right. And now they're living with it. And it's a legacy of shame for the good Germans. Well, too bad. You had bills to pay. And guess what? Now we are going to sue you for all that money you were saving for those bills.
Right. Something like that.
OAN, yeah. Very different and very weird. And I did see some other comments about that story and about what they were doing. And remember also that OAN for a long time was something that Trump was publicly flirting with buying. So they had every incentive to keep this up as a sale tactic more than anything else. That I didn't see included as part of these articles and comments.
Right. Anyway, so people really need to take a close, hard look at the Capitol riot and see what's going on. There's still hearings going on in Congress, but so far, Republicans and Democrats have decided to fight political battles about who's going to be on the commission to really study it, because I think Republicans want people like Jim Jordan, so it's fair. And, of course, that's a problem. My retired political scientist friend Peter Lemieux points out on Twitter that the Kerner Commission, after the long, hot summer of 1967, was put together by Lyndon Johnson in Executive Order 11365. So if Republicans and Democrats in Congress don't agree, Biden could do it.
Yeah, I guess that's a good... That's probably how it's going to have to happen, quite honestly.
11-member commission, and people are already lining up as to who should do it. They should have Republicans. Christy Todd Whitman and other, former Republicans could chair it. There's no reason why it can't happen. So just because Republicans are reluctant to agree who should be on it, since they don't really want to know what happened.
If you can't make up your mind, we'll help you.
Well, exactly right. That's no reason to stop it happening. So I thought that was an excellent suggestion. I would forward to our listening public.
Yeah.
And you can always call your Congress people and say, look, if they can't agree on who should be done by commission, then tell Biden to do it.
Yeah, that I think is a good idea. Did you? Is that in our list here?
No, but it's about to be.
Well, okay, good. Because I would like to look into that. It's, honestly, there's I just can't see any way that they can get anything through Congress. They're just too self-interested in making sure that the commission doesn't focus on them or is impotent to begin with. And though I wasn't a huge fan of the 9/11 commission and the way they handled it, I guess if that's supposed to be the model, then I guess it makes sense to have it chaired by an ex-New Jersey mayor, Republican. I don't know. That seems to be a tradition. But, yeah, they're out to and to find what they think of as facially neutral, just like the way they attack voting rights. They think, it's not that we don't believe necessarily that Trump supporters could have been behind the riot, although there's definitely a huge contingent that says, no, it's still pretending it's Antifa and wanting to investigate that. But they say, even if it was, we ought to, for balance, because fairness, we should investigate some other events where we think the far left might have been responsible.
Yeah, exactly. You want to look at what happened in Washington? We insist you look at Portland.
Yeah, I mean, but I understand the interest.
What's one thing got to do with the other?
Try that one on the 9/11 Commission. Well, sure, there was this terrible terrorist attack, but what about, X, Y, anything? What about 9/11? You're not a serious person.
I know the Derek Chauvin jury is going to have instructions read to them today, and then they have to decide whether or not he murdered George Floyd. Mm-hmm. But what about this unrelated event that happened some other time with some other situation?
Yeah, or may have nothing whatsoever to do with it. I mean, it doesn't
what about
make
OJ?
Any sense. Right. Honestly. Well, the answer to that, by the way, is You already had that investigation 11 times, and it was called Benghazi. So you want to what about something? This is what about to your Benghazi. Oh, my
God, what about Benghazi? I can't believe you didn't include it. I refuse to participate.
Right. Oh, then maybe that's the answer, right? So not only do you do it by executive order from Biden, but Biden says...
No, you're right. I'm sorry. We should. Let's investigate why you came up with Benghazi.
Yeah, we're going to have to do that.
We're going to have to do that. Not that Benghazi happened, but why did Republicans like Trey Gowdy insist that it did? Yes. What was going on there? Let's do that too.
And it's not that we're launching an investigation. It's all part and parcel of
the same thing. The one led to the other. Yeah. You thought you could get away with BS, and so then you are still trying to do. It's all the same thing.
Yeah. Right. There's an argument to be made there. And so instead of saying, well, I understand your argument, or let's say we grant the argument that if we open up an investigation into January 6th, there has to be some sop to Republicans in order to have fairness and balance. Well, that's okay because we're not doing that. This investigation into January 6th is the overdue sop to Democrats in fairness for the Benghazi investigation. This is our what about. And we're not giving you another platform to launch your own counter-programming with. We're taking our belated counter-programming to Benghazi, and so there's no opportunity for you here. I'm sorry, we've just struck the only fair deal that can be made. Well, they won't believe it, of course, no matter how you frame it. But, yeah, ultimately, I guess, if they're going to do any kind of investigation, that may be the road to it. Because, in Congress, there's no way to get a commission established without it being perverted, and I mean that sincerely, by Republicans. They're not going to have an investigation of this thing because it will just hang them. Which, by the way, keep that in mind. That's a good phrase. We might come back to that later. Okay. Well, that's very interesting. I'll have to look into the establishment of the Kerner Commission. And
right. I started you off with Wikipedia, but that's a cursory look, as Wikipedia often is. Maybe it has some good links, but there's other things. But there you have it, just a reminder that it exists. And that's my segment for today, trying to sum up everything that happened over the weekend that's important, which is to say that I remembered. It's a lot of important things happened that I didn't remember, so I didn't cover it. Yeah. So we'll be back on Wednesday and see maybe whether some of those things surface or just, went through the news cycle and then everybody moved on. Could
be, right. I mean, if some of them were
we might have a
mass shootings. So, yeah, right. True. I wonder how long they'll take to deliberate. It feels like they should take longer than that, but they must be sick of it by now.
Got to take at least an hour, just for appearance's sake. The optics of it.
Don't want to make it look too easy.
Yeah.
Make it look easy. We'll have lots of these trials. Don't want that.
You don't want that. All righty. Take care, and I'll talk to you on Wednesday.
Yes. All right. Thanks very much, Greg. We'll see you then. There was nothing easy about that trial, of course, although I did see some interesting commentary over the weekend, too, about how long it took to present the evidence in this trial, and that was largely because, there were some deep pockets, I guess. I imagine people must have sent an awful lot of money to the Legal Defense Fund for Chauvin, and because it was an enormously expensive production for them to put on. But then I saw a lot of, I guess, like right-wing leaning people criticizing like the length of time that the prosecution put into their presentation of evidence. And ordinarily it wouldn't have been necessary. You just show the video and say, the guy is leaning on his neck. Well, he's got a knee on his neck for 9.5 minutes, I think is the number they finally determined is going on here. That's kind of open and shut. But the defense was putting on such a production pretending to bring people who said they were experts that said things like, well, he could have caught a cold while he was down there for 9.5 minutes, and then it turns into pneumonia and et cetera, et cetera. Could have had comorbidities. It's the defense. I mean, you can't, the way our system works, you can't just blame the defense and say, well, you should, if you hadn't put up such a defense, then this trial would have been shorter. They're entitled to do that. But then you can't also complain, well, we kept saying things and the prosecution kept saying what they thought about those things. And so it's really the prosecution's fault for using up all this time saying what they thought of the things that we were presenting as a defense. If you're going to jump out of the way reflexively and say, as annoying as it is, he's entitled to a defense, Yeah, well, the state's entitled to a prosecution, and they're entitled to cross-examine your witnesses and to answer your evidence. So I don't know why they felt entitled to make that criticism, but probably because they're right-wing and crazy. Anyway, let's see. I really feel like reading more about that Kerner Commission, but I'll make that my job, let's say, off the air. By way of transitioning to the things I have stored away in pocket, and not to get into anything too big before our next break comes up. But yes, the One American News story seems like a very interesting one. And the other commentary that I saw about the piece that I don't know whether it actually got incorporated into the piece or was only available through this outside commentary, but I saw a tweet from Aswin Subsang, whose name I constantly am just fearful of pronouncing, but hopeful that I get right. And I guess at this point, he's probably famous enough that he's been interviewed somewhere, and I should go looking on YouTube to see if he's introduced on the air somewhere and doesn't correct the host about the pronunciation. But I don't know whether, at that point I won't know whether he's being polite or whether the host just got it right and asked ahead of time. Anyway, he tweets yesterday this comment accompanied with an older tweet from November of last year from Sam Stein to illustrate the point. But he says, with the OAN Washington Post story going around this morning, it would have been yesterday morning, another distinction between OAN and Newsmax and Fox is that while the latter two are effectively on Team Trump, OAN also has the unique distinction of one of their on-air hosts actually secretly working on the Rudy-led legal team to cancel democracy. This, an interesting observation, illustrated again, as I said, by Sam Stein's tweet from November of last year. Their scoop, the host for OAN, is assisting Trump's legal team with their election overturning efforts, showing up at campaign HQs, but never revealing it on the air. That reporting by the Daily Beast. Shall we go all the way back, perhaps, and read that one, or do we start by reading through the OAN story? I think the OAN story might take us a little while longer. Let's find out who this is and at least get that on the record just before we jump into our top of the hour break. So it's going to take a little while to open up, apparently. They're searching the bowels of the internet for this ancient publication from the Daily Beast. Datelined November 23rd, 2020. That's why it took so long, I guess. An OAN host has been helping Rudy with Trump's legal efforts. Cable news host Christina Bobb. Never, registered with me, but I didn't watch a lot of OAN. Neither did you. A lawyer by trade, believe it or not. But then again, so was, what's her name? Jenna Ellis. Anyway, she's actively working with Trump's counsel as it seeks to overturn the 2020 election. You remember all the Kraken suits here. And Aswin Subsang remembers this, of course, because he's actually on the byline with Sam Stein on this one, along with Maxwell Tunney. So, good. Keeping track of your own work is wise. As it seeks to overturn the election results and keep President-elect Joe Biden from assuming power. Never assume power. You make an ass out of you and me, right? President Donald Trump's legal team, fronted by lawyers such as Rudy Giuliani, Jenna Ellis, and until recently, Sidney Powell, and Bob, really, honestly, still Sidney Powell. That was the fake firing of Sidney Powell, another memory hold event. Anyway, where was I? You're right. As it seeks to overturn the election, the team has been operating out of a conference room at the 2020 campaign's downsized headquarters in Arlington, Virginia, aiding Trump's so-called elite strike force. Remember that terminology? Has been an on-air host of One America News Network, OAN, sometimes referred to with two N's there, a vociferously pro-Trump cable news channel that has been endorsed by the president. And again, keep in mind here the observation that they were on the auction block at some point. They were, or Trump, and especially Trump Jr., were teasing the idea of actually buying the place. So they had a financial interest in being as pro-Trump as possible. Christina Bobb chairs the weekly briefing on OAN. She's also a lawyer by trade, and in recent days, she's been spotted by several Trump officials at their office in the conference room with the rest of the president's team. Her presence has caused a bit of confusion among actual campaign staff who wondered if she was there to embed with the Trump legal strike force as a reporter. But according to multiple knowledgeable sources, Bobb has actually been assisting the president's long shot legal effort, effectively taking on a secondary role as a pro-Trump lawyer, even if she continues her job as a pro-Trump TV host. Christina is an attorney and has helped with some legal work in her personal capacity and not on behalf of OAN. Jenna Ellis, a senior legal advisor who doesn't know what she's talking about, told the Daily Beast on Monday afternoon, and I'm sure she thought that was wise legal counsel too, but she's an idiot, so don't believe it. Such an arrangement would be absolutely unthinkable in other newsrooms, but OAN's editorial stance is so committedly pro-Trump that it almost makes sense. Bobb certainly hasn't hidden her feelings for the president or his current legal endeavors. Even when compared to the output of other OAN on-air staff, she has shown intense commitment to the premise that Trump actually won the election that he clearly lost. Bobb's Twitter feed is clogged with baseless claims of fraud and grand proclamations about Trump's chances of overturning the election results and securing a second presidential term. During on-air segments, she has suggested that there was indeed a massive amount of voter fraud in both in Trump's election and potentially in others, including former Republican candidate Kim Klacik's, race in Maryland. The race she lost in a heavily Democratic district by over 40 percentage points, by the way. In recent segments about the Trump campaign's legal efforts, Bobb has not disclosed that she has been an informal consultant to those very same efforts, but that would, of course, require journalistic integrity. And again, we're talking about OAN. Yes, we'll be right back. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. We continue on. Let's keep reading this Daily Beast piece because it's kind of interesting background here. We said, we left off about how dedicated to the cause this Christina Bobb was. During her weekend show, she interviewed Ellis, her current legal collaborator, about recent developments in the campaign's challenges to election results in several states, but she did not note during the segment that she had any sort of role in the campaign's legal fight. So, highly unethical, of course. Let's say, oh, really? Look at this. They felt that was necessary to interrupt the show with a public safety alert. I was a little bit worried about that when I saw that come up on the phone. The public safety alert is, guess what? Just like everywhere else in the country, Virginians 16 and older now eligible for the vaccine. And how old is my youngest son? 15. So thanks a lot, and stop interrupting me. Let me know when I can get him a shot. Anyway, let's see. Yes, I think we'll just jump straight back into things. So Christina Bobb interviews the other idiot, Jenna Ellis, and says nothing about their relationship and the fact that they're working together on these lawsuits. Just says they're great lawsuits and they'll totally win. And of course, they totally didn't. On Twitter, Bobb has cheered on the Trump legal team, even praising its performance in a press conference in which such wild conspiracies were spun about voting corruption that the president himself reportedly thought it too far-fetched. Once more, she never disclosed that she has been working with that team. I guess that was probably the one where Sidney Powell implicated Hugo Chavez in all of this. And at that point, they said, she was never on the legal team. We don't know what you're talking about. Since Friday, and again, this was back in November, Bobb has not responded to multiple messages seeking comment on this story. Reached by phone on Monday, network founder and president Charles Herring declined to comment on his employees' activity with the Trump legal team, requesting the Daily Beast email him instead, and then he didn't respond to the email. Bobb's cozy relationship with the president's legal team may be the most brazen example of this cozy relationship, Trump and his campaign have maintained with members of the conservative media, but it's hardly the first. I was just struck by that sentence using the words cozy relationship twice in the same sentence. Bobb's cozy relationship with the president's legal team, maybe the most brazen example of the cozy relationship Trump and his campaign have maintained with members of the conservative media. So, okay. I was just reading it and saying, I don't understand. It's a cozy relationship is the most brazen example of cozy relationships. True, but it's also the best evidence of it. So I'll admit it under the best evidence rule. As the Daily Beast reported in 2018, they're patting themselves on the back, but good job. The president is regularly consulted with Fox Business Network host Lou Dobbs, who would call into private Oval Office meetings and advise the White House informally on various policies. The president also regularly canvasses his friends in conservative media about administration policy and messaging, phoning Fox News stars like Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity, and hosting Fox personality Laura Ingraham at the White House to advocate for the use of anti-malaria drugs like hydroxychloroquine to treat COVID-19. Didn't work, by the way. The other news networks have allowed their personalities, or rather, other ones, not all of them, but other news networks have allowed their personalities to dip their toes into partisan political activity, though to varying degrees. During the 2020 election, CNN contributor Ana Navarro hosted a virtual fundraiser for Biden, a move that the network said did not violate their policies because she was not paid. High-profile on-air personality Van Jones also advised Jared Kushner on the police reform executive order signed by Trump earlier this year. By the way, fat lot of good that did, right? How we doing on police reform? To avoid conflicts of interest, news networks generally do not allow their on-air contributors to endorse or run for office or work on political campaigns or political action committees while appearing as a paid analyst. Over the past month, since Joe Biden's election, MSNBC has cut ties with at least 4 contributors who have taken advisory roles in the president-elect's transition effort. By the way, of course, you recall how many times we've discussed the idea of a lot of journalists saying, I either won't discuss how I vote at all, or I actually won't vote in order to maintain my neutrality. She's working on the election campaign legal team to overturn, not just, advising the campaign on how it should be run, but seeking to overturn the election results. And, OAN has no scruples, and they have nothing to say about it. But OAN stands out in its on-air fealty to Trump, even when compared to the standards observed by its competitors in pro-MAGA right-wing media. 2 days before Election Day, the Daily Beast asked OAN President Charles Herring if the network would call the election for Trump if the president, as he planned to do, declared victory preemptively. Herring responded by messaging a lengthy statement that included, OAN is a subscriber to the Associated Press's VoteCast data and vote count elections results technology, and that for winner projections, the network will be utilizing primarily Associated Press VoteCast data and vote count. The statement also references the expert analysis provided by Christina Bobb, host of Weekly Briefing. So there's no telling what they intended to do at that point. In propping up an alternative media universe in which Trump didn't lose, OAN is ignoring its own system of data collection. The AP has long since called the 2020 presidential election for Biden, by the point this article had been written, and I guess OAN just refrained from calling anyone the winner of that particular election. So real geniuses working there. Anyway, I thought that was pretty interesting. No disclosure of that relationship. It brings back to mind my own adventures in trying way back when to get press credentials when I was writing the Congress Matters blog for Daily Kos, or trying to get Daily Kos press credentials at the press galleries at the House and Senate. I didn't actually have in mind at the time the idea of going there daily to cover Congress. I knew by that point you could do that from much further away than being there each day. But, and I really wasn't into the idea of interviewing members of Congress for exclusive content, etc. either, because largely because I had already come to realize that the answers that you get to most of these questions are not really necessarily meant to explain things. They tend to, you know how it is, the relationship between members of Congress and members of the press. And it's good to get them on the record saying things so that you can press them about questions that arise or variants to the scenarios they describe. But generally speaking, most of the information I was mostly interested in getting out of members of Congress, either they weren't going to tell me or they weren't going to give me enough time to get around to the questions that we really wanted to ask. It's the relationship is generally in the space of what's your position on X? And I did. Maybe they'll say I introduced a bill, you may recall, that has XYZ, and my press secretary will get back to you with the details, but you never get to press them on things like if you got a hold of Joe Manchin and you wanted to ask him about filibuster reform, right? And he would say, I've been clear about my position on that and yada, yada, yada. And I will never, and I never have, and I never will support any weakening of the filibuster. That's why I didn't vote with Harry Reid in 2013, and I didn't vote to change the filibuster rule when I wasn't with the Republicans when they did it, and I wasn't with the Democrats when they did it, and I'm consistent on that. And if you wanted to ask him a question like I posed when I talked to Joan about it, well, back in 2011 when you were voting on the grand bargain fiscal cliff deal, the Budget Control Act, and voting to set up the super committee, one of the things that you did, in addition to dividing the super committee evenly, which was stupid, but whatever, was to say that their legislative products could be brought to the floor under an expedited procedure that would preclude the use of the filibuster by time limiting debate on whatever bill they reported out. That, in fact, is exactly the sort of thing that you said you would never do and never have done. So given that you actually have done that, does that change anything? I mean, your quote was, there's no circumstance under which I would support such a thing, except that there has been a circumstance under which you supported exactly that sort of thing. So could you tell me why that's such a big problem going forward? Do you regret that vote on the Budget Control Act? That's a possible answer. And usually the answer to that is, I got to go, or that was totally different. Oh, what was the reason it was totally different? I don't know. I'll get back to you, and they don't get back to you. So, frustrating. It wasn't where I really wanted to spend my time. I actually was interested in getting access to the radio and television gallery so that I could get access to the floor camera feeds from the House and the Senate outside of the control of C-SPAN, which does a fine job with everything, but I actually was just sort of interested in a data project. Have I described this to you at some point? Probably at some point I've mentioned it. Just that we've mentioned before that the cameras that C-SPAN uses when they're covering floor activity are not their own cameras and not operated by C-SPAN. Did I say CNN? I meant C-SPAN. C-SPAN personnel, but rather by employees of the House and Senate, and they that's why there's such strict control over the way the cameras operate on the floor. They are House and Senate employees under orders to do things a certain way, but then they just run that feed to the House radio and television gallery, where, well, interesting, what happens to it? What you get to observe as C-SPAN is that signal piped out to the C-SPAN facilities down the street, which, overlays their little C-SPAN bug on it, and then they cut in and out with commentary and various other programming when nothing's happening on the House or Senate floors, and it gets beamed out to your cable provider as C-SPAN product, and it looks for all the world like they had their own cameras in the House and Senate chambers, although they'll remind you from time to time that that's not the case. But the other thing that happens with it is that C-SPAN feed is, or what we think of as the C-SPAN feed is, of course, particularly valuable to members of Congress. There is an internal closed circuit cable network on Capitol Hill that beams the House and Senate floor feeds directly to a cable channel that's not available anywhere but Capitol Hill offices. That is just raw video, and C-SPAN has nothing to do with it. It will, of course, if something's happening on the floor, the two channels are indistinguishable because they're the same signal, but you can tell which one, which channel you're on by the appearance of the C-SPAN bug down in the corner if you're on C-SPAN, but no such thing on the internal network, which is just a reminder that the raw feed is there, and it's because it is produced with public dollars by public employees is a public property. Now, you can't take the C-SPAN feed and use that and rebroadcast it on your own network because that's had value added to it. You have a copyright issue there. They're adding their own proprietary value to it. I don't know what the bug does for you, but you're not supposed to steal their signal. But you can use the public signal that's available to press organizations from the radio and TV gallery. And so if you are if you're CBS News and you want footage of floor activity during a House consideration of a bill, you don't have to take it from C-SPAN and say courtesy of C-SPAN when you run it in the news network, the news broadcast that night on CBS. You can take the raw floor feed from the House radio and TV gallery, although, why have an employee in place just to do that when you can just as easily just call on the phone, ask C-SPAN for the clip, they'll give it to you. It's a lower cost option, but you can just pipe it out from the control board in the radio and TV gallery and run it without credit because it's public information. It's a public broadcast, so to speak. So what I wanted to do was get credentials so that I could have access to that feed, and I could just pipe the whole thing out the other side and say, let's run it online somewhere on a website. It's the same as C-SPAN content, but instead of having to live with C-SPAN's commentary and programming choices in between sessions, we could have our own. And I could even talk along with what's going on and critique the debate and the vote and discuss what's happening on our own channel on the internet, like we're doing now. But you couldn't do that simply by taking C-SPAN's feed. You would have to intercept the feed before then. But they wouldn't give us any credentials because, of course, their concern was, well, your Daily Kos, that's a partisan publication. We can't have partisan publications recognized as actual honest-to-God journalists, not here in the Capitol. No. And, of course, our credentialing process is also mirrored over at the White House. If you get congressional press pass, that is something that you can use to apply for a hard pass to the White House press room as well. You all may remember that when Talon News, the original OAN and Newsmax, wanted to do that and pose as an actual journalistic effort, that's the way they used to get by the credentialing process at the White House. Anyway, they wouldn't allow Daily Kos to do it because we were too partisan, even though by that time already Sean Hannity was appearing at fundraisers for Republican congresspeople all over the place and candidates, and it made no difference. And I guess they're technically they say, well, Sean Hannity isn't credentialed here. Fox News is, but Sean Hannity isn't. And yeah, I don't know. For whatever reason, they just persisted in rejecting us. Meanwhile, by the way, I guess that leads me to another angle on this story, although I would like to return to the OAN story at some point, that Rebecca Romans brings to our attention, a story in The Hill, speaking of citizen journalists, back in the day when the House radio and TV gallery folks, or is it the Senate that runs this? I can't remember which one runs it, but they were not comfortable enough with the citizen journalist label, and neither was I, really, honestly, to allow Daily Kos to take advantage of it then. But now this is interesting. So she sends me this Hill piece that says Capitol riot defendants are apparently asserting as a defense against their charges that are pending against them that they are citizen journalists. And that's why they were in the Capitol, you see, including, and it's illustrated by a picture of the guy with the stupid giant fur hat on his head, whatever the QAnon shaman thing. And I don't know whether that's one of the claims that he's making. Capitol riot defendants use journalism as defense against charges. Should I try to pronounce the author's name? Olafemihan Ocean. Oh, I'm doing a terrible job, but what can I tell you? I was surprised by that one. 8 people charged in cases related to the Capitol riot on January 6th are using journalism as part of their defense, the Associated Press reported. The defendants do not work at any mainstream outlets and do not have proper credentials that journalists are required to obtain. I tried to get them. Instead, the defendants are behind right-wing websites, although it says right-winged websites, which is an interesting way of putting it. Right-wing websites, which include InfoWars and platforms called, and these are platforms, I wonder whether they existed ahead of time or that some of them have been invented since January 6th. And I was representing them because one of the platforms is called Murder the Media News, which is ironic, of course, in many ways. But, of course, that's what got scrawled on the door of one of the radio and television galleries, I think, or press galleries in the Congress during the insurrection on January 6th. Somebody scrawled that, Murder the Media. Now I'm going to call myself Murder the Media News, which, never mind, we'll leave aside the irony of it. Other outlets called Political Trance Tribune, I wonder if that's the shaman guy. Insurgents USA, that is ENCE, like the act of insurgency. Insurgents USA, and Thunderdome TV, according to the Associated Press reporting here. One defendant told authorities his work involved live streaming protests. We have heard of one guy who sort of actually does engage in that activity regularly, possibly being charged. What else? He's charged with joining the demonstration at the Capitol. Journalism experts said such definitions were too broad given the lack of credentials and the fact that the defendants were breaking the law by storming the Capitol. But while the internet has given more people a platform to use their voice, the definition of a journalist is not that broad when put into practice in court, says Lucy Dalglish. Get both L's in there. Dean of the University of Maryland's Philip Merrill College of Journalism, in the Associated Press report. You are, at that point, an activist with a cell phone, and there were lots of activists with copyrighted videos who sold them to news organizations, Dalglish said. That doesn't make them journalists. Federal prosecutors have charged hundreds of people, and not enough, in my opinion, for storming the Capitol on January 6th in support of President Trump's, unsubstantiated claims of widespread fraud in the election and interrupting Congress's certification of President Biden's Electoral College win. The riots resulted in 5 deaths, including that of a Capitol police officer. So, of some interest, to say the least. I wonder whether the Associated Press reporting on that brings us any further insights. I'll parse through that at some point. It actually does pose a pretty interesting question. Let's see. Do they? You think this is a manageable article? Yeah, probably so. Let's examine it. The Trump supporters who stormed the Capitol of the U.S., the U.S. Capitol in January, created a trove of self-incriminating evidence, thoroughly documenting their actions in words and videos and social media posts. Now, some of the camera-toting people in the crowd are claiming they were only there to record history as journalists, not to join a deadly insurrection. I was wondering whether this introductory paragraph was going to tell us, are they now trying to withhold the incriminating evidence from being introduced in court by saying, as a journalist, I refuse to reveal my sources. I'm protecting my sources under the First Amendment protections, even though the source is me? That'd be an interesting twist. I don't know if we'll get to that. I am reading, by the way, the AP piece, Some January 6th Defendants Try to Use Journalism as a Riot Defense by Michael Kunzelman and Jacques Billaud. I'll continue with it. It's unlikely that any of the self-proclaimed journalists can mount a viable defense on First Amendment speech grounds, experts say. They face long odds if video captured them acting more like rioters than impartial observers. But as the internet has broadened and blurred the definition of a journalist, some appear intent on trying. I still haven't heard about the shaman and what he's doing in that picture, illustrating the Hills article. At least 8 defendants charged have identified themselves as journalists or as documentary filmmakers, including 3 people arrested this month, according to the Associated Press review of court records in nearly 400 federal cases. The insurrection, led to the deaths. I won't go over that again. Some rioters manhandled and menaced the reporters and photographers who are credentialed to cover Congress and were trying to cover the mayhem of that day. A group of AP journalists had photographic equipment stolen and destroyed outside the building. But somehow, these journalists got a pass from all of that, or they were never threatened for some strange reason. One defendant, Sean Weitzman, I'm guessing, Witzzemann, told authorities he was inside the Capitol during the riot as part of his work in live streaming video at protests, and has since argued that he was there as a journalist. That explanation did not sway the FBI. The plumber from Farmington, New Mexico, is charged with joining in the demonstration in the Capitol while Congress was certifying Joe Biden's electoral victory over Donald Trump. I seek truth. I speak to sources. I document. I provide commentary. It's everything that a journalist is, Weitzman told a New Mexico television station after his arrest on April 6th. He did not respond to a social media message and email from the AP. Weitzman's nightly news show is called The Armenian Council for Truth in Journalism. Satirically, his attorney says. Its YouTube page, which has just over 300 subscribers, says the show delivers irreverent and thought-provoking commentary and analysis on an eclectic range of subjects. Wow, what a great description. Another defendant works for InfoWars. You know about them. That's Alex Jones's operation. Others have fringe platforms named Political Trans Tribune. There's a link for that one. I wonder what that... Oh, well, it's a download, so I'm not going to bother going... Oh, it's from the Justice Department. Okay. Insurgents USA, Thunderdome TV, and Murder the Media News. But while the internet has given more people the platform to use their voice... Right, the definition of journalist, yada, yada. This is the Lucy Dalglish quote. Let's see, we can skip down that. Even credentialed reporters and news photographers aren't immune from prosecution if they break the law on the job, says Jane Kirtley, who teaches media ethics and law at the University of Minnesota. It's not a get-out-of-jail-free card. Samuel Montoya, an InfoWars video editor, was arrested Tuesday in Texas on charges including impeding passage through the Capitol grounds. He spoke on an InfoWars show about witnessing a police officer shoot and kill a woman inside the Capitol. Ah, yes, the Ashley Babbitt shooting. Which, by the way, I don't know if you happen to see the execrable Jonathan Turley writing over the weekend, hey, claiming not to understand, I don't understand why the cop that shot Ashley Babbitt isn't being charged, but the cops who shoot everyone else, they get charged all of a sudden, right? So he can't tell the difference between people who are shot during traffic stops and people who are shot at the vanguard of a riot seeking to overturn the results of an election. But whatever. Okay. Climbing into the speaker's lobby. Montoya, also recorded and narrated a video while walking through the building, occasionally referring to himself as a journalist, while wearing a red MAGA hat, so that's not going to help. We're going to do whatever it takes to MAGA, he said, according to the FBI. Montoya told the judge on Wednesday that he works for InfoWars and mentioned that Jones also was in Washington on January 6th, and that's true, and has not been charged in the riot, but Montoya asked if returning to work or contacting his boss could violate his pretrial release conditions. That's a possibility. Let's see. There was also far-right internet troll Tim Baked Alaska Gionet, however he pronounces Gione, I'm not sure, was arrested less than 2 weeks after the riot, streamed live video that showed himself inside the Capitol. and encouraging others to other protesters to stay. Investigators say he profanely called an officer an oathbreaker and chanted, "Whose house? Our house." Sounds journalistic. Another defendant, John Earl Sullivan, leads the protest group Insurgents USA. Let's see. I'm trying to look to see whether there's any news about the shaman guy, although I don't know if I would recognize his name even if I saw it. There's some more about Murder the Media. Maybe I can tell you after we return. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning. I have good news to report. Many more listeners like you are making critical contributions that keep our show on the air. Makes good sense, of course, and patreon.com, patreon.com, makes it simple. Now you can make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for helping keep you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all of your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see if we can find out a little bit more about the claims of Murder the Media News to be a real organization. Nicholas DiCarlo told the Los Angeles Times that he and another alleged rioter, Nicholas Oakes, or perhaps Ox, O-C-H-S, the two Nicholases, the two knucklehead Nicholases, both they say are journalists, they're claiming, but the FBI said Oakes and DiCarlo are self-identified Proud Boys and content producers, well, there's that, for an online forum called Murder the Media News. Prosecutors say DiCarlo wrote Murder the Media on a door in the building. I told you we saw that. We all saw it. When authorities later searched his home, they found a framed photo of DiCarlo and Ox posing in front of the door with a thumbs up. And I was hoping there might be some more questions answered in this one, like, was there a organization called Murder the Media News before January 6th or not? Or did they simply say, we need to put up a defense by pretending to be journalists? We need a journalism organization to say we're with. And wouldn't it be funny if we named it Murder the Media News? Because one, it would be ironic. And two, it would be pretty obvious that we made it up post hoc. And if this were to work, we could troll America once again by pointing out how ridiculous its laws are and how we are not subject to them as Proud Boys. But we'll see. So far, it sounds like it's not supposed to work, but, you know, we have a long ways to go here before people land in jail for the crimes of January 6th. All right, let's see. Other things that I wanted to bring up, and there are certainly a lot. I feel an obligation to touch on some of these things. Although this now, I'm reminded, maybe we can save this for a Tuesday discussion with Joan. Secret as to which one we're setting aside for later. And we can jump to a few other interesting things. This one, I think, how about this one? Here is a total shift in gears, but back to a Trump name, a Trump-associated name that we were tracking for a long time, about whom there is new writing, if not new information. But I feel like we can trust David Ignatius to probably come up with some new information. I'd like to know what the hook is here for him to revisit the topic of Kash Patel and publish this in the Washington Post just over the weekend, April 16th. Was that Friday? Yeah, so post-show. But let's see what we've got here. Opinion piece in the Washington Post. How Kash Patel rose from obscure Hill staffer to key operative in Trump's battle with the intelligence community. That's a good question. I should like to know about that. And I'm curious as to how it ends up in the opinion pages here. So how did he do it? That sounds factual. Is this an opinion? We'll see. David Ignatius, again, in the Trump administration's 4-year battle with the intelligence community, a recurring character was a brash lawyer named Kashyap Kash Patel. He appeared so frequently in so many incarnations that he was almost a Zelig figure in President Donald Trump's confrontation against what he imagined as the deep state. Patel repeatedly pressed intelligence agencies to release secrets that, in his view, showed that the president was being persecuted unfairly by critics. Ironically, he is now facing Justice Department investigation for possible improper disclosure of classified information, according to two knowledgeable sources who requested anonymity because of the sensitivity of the probe. The sources said the investigation resulted from a complaint made this year by an intelligence agency, but wouldn't provide additional details. Patel didn't respond to text, email, and voicemail messages or a request to talk at his residence. A lawyer described as representing him also did not respond. While other Trump staffers, most prominently advisor Stephen Miller, became near household names, Patel, now 41, flew largely beneath the radar during the Trump administration. Not our radar, we caught him. But in the span of 4 years, he rose from an obscure Hill staffer to become one of the most powerful players in the national security apparatus. The saga of his battles with the intelligence bureaucracy shows how the last administration empowered its lieutenants to challenge what it saw as the deep state. At the start of the Trump administration, Patel was a senior counsel for Representative Devin Nunes when the California Republican chaired the House Intelligence Committee in 2017 and 2018, and emerged as a leading critic of the investigation by Special Counsel Robert Mueller into the Trump campaign's alleged links to Russia. Patel then joined Trump's National Security Council staff as Senior Director for Counterterrorism. In 2020, he was Senior Advisor to Acting Director of National Intelligence Richard Grenell and his successor, John Ratcliffe, helping lead their efforts to remove senior career intelligence officers. Patel's most prominent role was his final job as Chief of Staff for Acting Defense Secretary Christopher Miller in the administration's last 2 months. In that position, according to sources close to events, he challenged the Central Intelligence Agency and the National Security Agency and very nearly became acting director of the CIA himself. It's incredible. As with so many other still mysterious aspects of the Trump presidency, there's a riddle at the center of Patel's many activities. Beyond the basic goal of advancing Trump's personal agenda, was there a larger mission? Was there a systemic plan, for example, to gain control of the nation's intelligence and military command centers as part of Trump's effort to retain the presidency despite his loss in the November 2020 election? Or was this a more capricious campaign driven by Trump's personal pique and score settling without a clear strategy? Opinions about Patel differed among the dozen current and former senior officials who discussed his activities with me anonymously so that they could describe sensitive matters freely. One top Pentagon official saw Patel as a direct threat to lawful government and says he advised him of potential legal risks. But several others described him as an ambitious but clumsy bumbler. Was this a Machiavellian master plan or the Three Stooges? Asked one. Said another, these guys were like kids in high school. They made snap decisions and spewed out directives without analysis to back them up. Patel's story is an unlikely version of the American immigrant's dream. He was born in 1980 in Long Island's Garden City and attended public schools there. His family's roots are in Gujarat, India, by way of East Africa. He earned his undergraduate degree from the University of Richmond and a law degree from Pace University. After a stint as a public defender in Miami, he moved to the Justice Department in 2014, where he worked on national security cases. His Pentagon biography describes him as a lifelong ice hockey player, coach, and fan. When Patel joined the House Intelligence Committee staff in 2017, he spearheaded then-Chairman Nunes' efforts to challenge allegations that the Trump team had improper contact with Russian officials during the 2016 presidential campaign. Okay. Let's see. In May of 2017, for example, intelligence officials say Patel was involved in delivering subpoenas to the CIA, FBI, and NSA, asking whether Obama administration officials had ever requested unmasking, remember this, of the names of Trump campaign officials who were picked up in communications intercepts. Democrats criticized the unusual direct requests of the agencies. Patel made another surprising foray in July of 2017 when he showed up in London at the office of former MI6 officer Christopher Steele, who the previous year had provided the FBI, of course, with reports financed in part by the Clinton campaign, but also financed in part by Republican campaigns, they don't know for some reason, on Trump's alleged Russia links. When Patel didn't find Steele at his own office, he went to the address of his lawyer, according to published reports, where he found the ex-spy but didn't interview him. The quixotic hunt became known as London calling within the House Intelligence Committee. Patel sometimes hit pay dirt. He was the main author of a January 2018 House Intelligence Committee report recounting abuses by the FBI in its application for electronic surveillance of former Trump campaign aide Carter Page. Though Democrats at the time were reluctant to agree, facts that emerged later showed serious abuses in the Page investigation, and a former FBI lawyer pleaded guilty last year to falsifying information that was used to apply for warrants from the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. In a March 2018 report for Nunes, Patel challenged the document that Trump supporters see as the deep state's opening salvo against the former president, the January 2017 intelligence community assessment alleging that Russia had tried to help his 2016 campaign. The classified evidence he gathered for Nunes showed a rushed investigation and tradecraft failings, Patel contended in an interview with Aaron Mate for Real Clear Investigations, published on February 25th, one of the few interviews he has given. Many of his subsequent battles with the intelligence community were efforts to secure release of the March 2018 report. Patel then moved to the NSC staff as a senior director for counterterrorism, where he was active in the closing stages of the war against the Islamic State. Is that over? Including the pursuit of its leader, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who was killed in October of 2019. But at the White House, the combative Patel was increasingly drawn into Trump's battle against an intelligence community that the president had come to regard as an enemy. So we were busy fighting ISIS, but he was busy fighting our intelligence services who were fighting ISIS, because he's the real patriot. The assault on the intelligence community escalated when Dan Coats was pressured into retiring as Director of National Intelligence in August of 2019. Coats had disagreed with Trump about Russian election interference, North Korea, and other subjects, and Trump aides had been speculating for months that he would be fired. Rather than appoint Coates' widely respected deputy, Sue Gordon, to succeed him, Trump chose as acting head Joseph Maguire, a former Navy SEAL and head of the National Counterterrorism Center, but Maguire was sacked in February 2020 after one of his deputies briefed the House Intelligence Committee on Russian election interference, drawing Trump's wrath. Former officials recall that Patel arrived at the DNI's headquarters at Liberty Crossing, near Tyson's Corner, Virginia, on February 20th, the day Maguire had been told to leave. He accompanied Grinnell, the new acting DNI, but employees said it was Patel, as a top advisor, who ran the place and began a house cleaning. Deirdre Walsh, the chief operating officer, was ousted, along with Russell Travers, the acting head of the National Counterterrorism Center. Patel was the action officer. He made it happen, recalled one former top intelligence official. Ratcliffe replaced Grinnell to become DNI in May 2020, with Patel remaining a key aide. With the November presidential election looming, Trump wanted the intelligence community under reliable political control. Through the summer and early fall, Ratcliffe and Patel pressed for declassification of Patel's March 2018 report for Nunes, according to former and current officials, evidently believing it would exonerate Trump. General Paul Nakasone, I'm guessing again at the pronunciation, but I think we've tried that once before, the head of Cyber Command and the NSA, argued that releasing some of these sensitive documents and depositions Patel had gathered would compromise intelligence sources and methods. So did FBI Director Christopher Wray, CIA Director Gina Haspel, and Defense Secretary Mark Esper. Anger toward Patel within the national security bureaucracy mounted after an October 31st, 2020 hostage rescue mission in Nigeria. The incident, never previously reported in detail, was described by 4 high-level sources. I don't think I'm familiar with this. It was a rescue mission that was nearly aborted, partly because of inadequate coordination by Patel. Yikes. SEAL Team 6, of course, had been assigned to rescue 27-year-old Philip Walton, a missionary's son who had been kidnapped by gunmen in Niger, near the border with Nigeria. Patel, a senior counterterrorism advisor, had assured colleagues that the mission had a green light, according to several sources. The SEALs were ready to parachute into the rescue site from high altitude, one source estimated 30,000 feet, when there was a last-minute hitch. But as the SEALs were about to jump, military commanders and State Department officials realized that one necessary item hadn't been completed. The Nigerian government hadn't been informed prior to the operation inside their country as required. A frantic last-minute effort to obtain the necessary permission ensued. The SEAL team's aircraft held over the target, flying in a racetrack pattern for about 45 minutes, while the State Department tried to locate a Nigerian national security official who could receive the official notice. Finally, just 15 minutes before the operational window closed, the Nigerians were given word, the SEALs parachuted down, and the hostage was rescued. At least it went well. But yeah, imagine, gee whiz, I forgot to tell the people whose country it's going to happen in. But of course, he thinks, like Trump does, it's an S-hole country and doesn't deserve notice, I'm sure. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and General Mark Milley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, were angry that, in their view, Patel had prematurely said the operation was fully cleared. According to knowledgeable officials, one senior Pentagon official said he was incensed at Patel. A second senior Pentagon official described Patel's actions as potentially dangerous for the SEALs. Sure. The battle against the deep state continued, meanwhile. Patel kept pushing, along with DNI Ratcliffe, for declassification of memos challenging the origins of the Russia investigation. Nakasone, depending, I don't know. Anyway, he strongly dissented, and Esper backed him up in an October letter to Ratcliffe, urging that the information not be released due to the harm it would do to national security, including specific harm to the military, a senior defense official said. Haspel, too, strongly opposed the release of the information. Their argument for protecting sensitive information was finally supported by Attorney General William Barr, and Trump backed away, a source close to the event said. I think there were people within the IC at the heads of certain intelligence agencies who did not want their tradecraft called out, even though it was during a former administration, because it doesn't look good on the agency itself, Patel said in the Real Clear Investigations interview. But the military and intelligence officials who had resisted Trump were now White House targets, with Patel helping to lead the campaign. On November 9th, Trump fired Esper and installed Christopher Miller, head of the National Counterterrorism Center and a former Trump White House aide, as acting defense secretary. Patel was named his chief of staff. So, by the way, I guess the emerging pattern here is Patel may or may not believe that these people are in fact part of the deep state, but it seems like he targets people who are in jobs that he wants, clears them out, gets them fired, and then takes the job. Half dozen officials say Miller was largely a figurehead and that Patel was the key civilian official at the Pentagon during the last 2 months of Trump's presidency. Joining Patel in pressing Trump's agenda was Ezra Cohen-Watnick. He managed to stick around this whole time. A former Trump NSC aide who had been named acting Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence. He was originally tainted by being on Mike Flynn's team, but has somehow survived all this time. The Trump team's moves appeared to Patel's colleagues to be motivated partly by a desire to restrict the intelligence agency's power and partly to deliver on Trump's promise to end overseas wars. In mid-November, Douglas McGregor, a retired Army colonel who was serving as a senior advisor to Miller, obtained Trump's signature on an order withdrawing, by year's end, all 4,500 troops then in Afghanistan. Patel handed the order to Milley, a Pentagon official remembered. The sudden withdrawal proposal hadn't been discussed within the military, and after Pentagon protests, it was quickly reversed by the White House. Asked about the incident when I first reported it in March, McGregor said he couldn't comment. Miller and Patel were more successful with a December 4th order to withdraw U.S. troops from Somalia. Despite speculation in the military that well-paid mercenaries might take over that mission, that decision was more likely was a chance to grab what one knowledgeable official describes as low-hanging fruit in Trump's push to bring troops home. Unlike deployments in Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan, the Somalia mission had few vocal defenders. The Trump team's long-standing friction with the CIA surfaced in an early December letter from Miller to Haspel, warning that the Pentagon planned to halt support for the CIA's Special Activities Center, for which its paramilitary missions often uses special operations forces that are redesignated, sometimes for multi-year tours, as intelligence rather than military personnel. A senior Pentagon official described Miller's proposal as vindictive. The Pentagon reviewed it, but no action was taken before Miller and Patel departed on January 20th. Nakasone and the NSA were the next targets. Miller, Patel, and Cohen-Watnick proposed to Milley that Nakasone's so-called dual-hatted authority over both NSA and Cyber Command be separated, and that he retain only the military command. Milley pushed back hard, and so did Representative Adam Smith of Washington, chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, who wrote to Miller and Milley, "I remind you that any action to terminate his dual-hat relationship with NSA and Cyber Command is not only inadvisable, but is contrary to law." The final chapter in this strange saga was Trump's brief effort in December to remove Haspel at CIA and replace her with Patel. Odd that he keeps doing this. Haspel's apparent crime was that for months she had been resisting efforts by Trump and Patel to declassify the information he had gathered for Nunes back in the 2018 report. He's trying this everywhere. Patel told Real Clear Investigations that Haspel had personally thwarted his push for disclosure of the report that he had prepared for Nunes. The CIA has possession of it, and POTUS chose not to put it out, Patel said. An account of the final campaign to oust Haspel was compiled from several sources with close knowledge of the events. Patel was traveling in Asia with Miller when he was abruptly recalled to Washington on December 8th. Rumors were flying that he was being considered as a possible replacement for Wray at FBI or Haspel at CIA. Both would have been disastrous, of course. On December 12th, when Trump was attending the Army-Navy football game, he discussed with top aides a sensitive future assignment for Patel, one person recalled. Trump's plan unfolded days later when Haspel visited the White House to attend the president's daily intelligence briefing. After the briefing, she was approached by Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, who told her that Trump intended to fire CIA Deputy Director Vaughn Bishop and install Patel in his place. Haspel balked. She said that she would resign rather than accept Patel as her deputy. She said she would like to deliver her resignation directly to the president. Meadows disappeared and returned a few minutes later to say that the president had changed his mind. Bishop wouldn't be fired. Patel wouldn't be sent to the agency. Haspel would remain as director. Reviewing this long, tangled tale, 3 themes stand out. The first is that Patel was an important, if largely invisible, operative in Trump's efforts to control the intelligence community in an escalating series of moves from 2017 to 2020. The second is Trump's campaign to redirect intelligence agencies, backed by Patel, was thwarted by a group of senior administration officials, a group that included at various times Milley, Esper, Haspel, Barr, Pompeo, White House counsel Pat Cipollone, and at the very end, Meadows. The third takeaway is the most perplexing, and in an odd way reassuring. The truth is that for all the roadblocks these aides put in Trump's way, he had the authority as commander-in-chief to do what he wanted in national security: declassify and release documents, hire and fire people, direct agencies to take actions he wanted. Facing resistance from courageous officials who sought to protect the government, Trump, in many cases, simply backed down. As bad as this story was, in other words, it could have been much worse. It is very interesting, and I guess Donald Trump's just never was the guy to execute that sort of thing. He's just too weak-willed for it, thank God, and brings to mind the warnings we've had from folks along the way who say, the real danger is that we will one day get someone who's actually a competent bureaucrat in this same role and carrying the same ideology, authoritarian ideology. Somebody who really knows what levers to pull and how to do it could be that much more dangerous. It's not necessarily that Trump is the only crazy one. It's just we're lucky that he happens to be incompetent on top of his craziness. Interesting, though. And I guess to Ignatius, it doesn't stand out that Patel, maybe it's a natural consequence of Patel doing these things. He wants to clear people out of these roles because he thinks they're corrupt or incompetent, and is maybe just dismisses the fact that Patel then takes that job as being, well, if you want something done right, you got to do it yourself, ism, as opposed to, I just want to occupy every important job that there is and work my way up the food chain inside of 4 years to where I'm actually considered for director of CIA or the FBI, for God's sake. Very interesting and very revealing. And I'll bet Empty Wheel has some stuff to say about that too. Although I'm not positive, and I haven't seen her tweeting about it. She's got plenty to keep her busy as it is. All right, let's see. A couple other items that I have put away to share with you. Well, let's see. There's some minor developments in the Matt Gaetz news in that they are speaking now to some of the women who showed up at some of these, prepaid sugar daddy parties that he and Joel Greenberg put on, and looking more and more like Greenberg is just going to bury Gaetz at some point real soon. So fingers crossed about that one. Let's see. Trying to think about whether there's any other things we can sneak in just a minute or so that we have left. How about this one? I happened to see Adam Bonin tweet this morning, and this is probably short enough for us to get in here. SCOTUS, he says, has turned away the cert petition in the I don't know how they pronounce this, Bognet, the last name of the party here, Bognet or Bonnet, or I have no idea whether it's Frenchified or not. Anyway, this was the last remaining vehicle, Adam says, through which the court could have determined whether the Pennsylvania Supreme Court's extension of the ballot receipt deadline usurped the Pennsylvania General Assembly's constitutional authority. In other words, the SCOTUS has declined to take the case, which means that the ruling below stands, which, as I recall, is the Pennsylvania Supreme Court saying, no, it's not a problem that the extension of, or I guess the court itself, extension of the ballot receipt deadline doesn't usurp the legislature's constitutional authority, which was the theory that the Kraken lawyers and others were proposing. We last confronted it, I guess, in the Wisconsin case, where it was a question of their claim that the legislature is being granted the power to determine the manner in which the electors from the state shall be selected, extended to every operating detail of an election. And our belief that no, that actually has nothing whatsoever to do with it, and the court turning away its last opportunity to say otherwise. So that's pretty good, and I'll accept that as a vindication of our position called out earlier and ahead of the Wisconsin court's decision, but I think we were right on that one, and nobody is interested in taking up the case to say different. So that's good news. And that gives us a chance to wrap things up. Tomorrow being Tuesday, Joan McCarter scheduled to be with us. and we can talk a little bit about this thing. We can now tease that other item, which I left for tomorrow, which was somewhat controversial over the weekend, a story in The Hill entitled Senators in the Dark on Parliamentarians' Decision. That would be the decision about the ability of the Democrats in Congress to pass a revised budget resolution that would include new reconciliation instructions. We can talk about that and the weird dynamic it reveals, which has been familiar to us for some time, but we'll save it again for Tuesday. Now, though, time for Justice Putnam to pick up the mic for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy next here on Netroots Radio. We can talk a little about what comes up next after this. We can sneak this one in. How about this? Former Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull put Rupert Murdoch on blast. Let's find out what that's about next.
From netrootsradio.com, you have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
What else is up? A pandemic Good Samaritan faces a hefty tax bill for his efforts. No surprise there. And as mask mandates end around the various states, Oregon bucks the trend with a permanent rule. And faith leaders across the country are asking corporate executives to condemn voting restrictions or face a boycott. All next with Justice.